What scares you the most about a second Trump term, and what is truly at stake on a national level?
I mean, everything scares me.
They have this belief that Biden and Trump are effectively the same. So, how do you combat that to a young voter?
These things kept leaking about him talking about being a dictator on day one, him wanting people to rise at attention like they do for Kim Jong-un. And we found out more about January 6th. So we found out more about how he really tried to overturn the election.
I am joined today by the first Gen Z member of Congress, Representative Maxwell Frost, who is out there making my generation proud, making Florida proud, making the entire country proud. Representative, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thank you so much for having me on. It's great to be here.
And thank you for making the time. So my first question to you stems from a tweet you made a few weeks back in response to Republicans who seem to have moved on from this critical race theory boogeyman and are now focused on DEI. You said DEI hire equals disgusting racial slur, which is true, especially the way they were talking about the Baltimore mayor. But can you break down what DEI means and why it's important so that MAGA can stop driving the narrative?
Yeah, exactly. Well, thanks for having me on. I mean, DEI is something that's been around for a bit, and what it stands for is diversity, equity, and inclusion. These sort of DEI programs at different private corporations, companies, small businesses, nonprofits, and even government entities work at assessing the totality of the organization and how it can be a more equitable place, not just in terms of hiring practices, which is something that a lot of times the right wing likes to focus on, but also on retention of that staff and also on the way that the company interacts with its customers or the people that it's serving. And so it looks at people from different marginalized backgrounds and figures out how does our company or organization interact with these folks and how can we be more of an accessible company and organization for the people that we're serving. And so a lot of times MAGA on the right wing like to hone in specifically on DEI as it relates to Black Americans, Black and Brown Americans, which is incredibly important given the fact that our country was built on the backs of enslaved Black people, and we have to keep this in mind as we do this work. But DEI isn't just about race; it's also about how do we take care of our veterans? How do we make sure that we're taking care of folks with disabilities, people with language barriers? It's really the totality of everything. So if you're against DEI, you're against programs that look at supporting our veterans, look at supporting people with disabilities, people who speak different languages, and programs that look at people of different races and socioeconomic backgrounds. So it's really more than what they talk about. And look, here's the problem. The problem isn't so much that maybe they're bringing up issues with DEI. I mean, that is a problem because there really aren't that many issues with DEI. They're important programs. But it's the fact that it's become a new kind of racist dog whistle here. And you said it perfectly, right? It was critical race theory. Before that, it was the term thug, urban. And then before that, they just, called you the N-word. And so that's kind of the elevation we've seen here. And now we're getting to the place where instead of calling you the N-word or calling you some racist slur, they want to say, oh, you're a DEI hire. And essentially what they're saying is you didn't earn where you're at. You're stupid. You don't deserve to be there. And you're just there because you're Black. And that's racist.
Yeah, that was a great breakdown, and calling the mayor of Baltimore a DEI hire doesn't even make sense in the first place. It feels like Republicans know that they have no actual policy prescriptions, so they manufacture these issues. They did this on Easter the other day. But I also wanted to ask you about a comment made by Hillary Clinton on the Jimmy Fallon show, where she's talking about disillusion voters and says, get over yourself. And while I understand the sentiment, it seems like we both agree that that may be suboptimal messaging. So how do you think we should go about messaging to these disillusioned young voters?
Yeah, I mean, I come from organizing, so I'm a little biased here in the way I think about this, but I also think it's the right way to think about it. And, I think any messaging you use on a campaign, whether it's from the podium or in an interview or on paid comms or a TV ad, etc., you should think about, will this message do what we wanted to do at the doors? Like, how would someone, when you're knocking on a door, react to it? And of course, if you're knocking on someone's door and they say, I'm disillusioned with this election, I'm not feeling it, and you say, get over yourself, you're probably going to get the door slammed in your face. And not only that, but you've probably pushed that voter further away. And I think as Democrats, Donald Trump is an existential threat to our democracy. But here's the thing. If Donald Trump were to win, he's not, we're going to win. But if Donald Trump were to win, I don't think it would be because there are people who would have voted for Joe Biden who voted for Donald Trump. our issue here isn't that we're losing voters to Trump. It's that we don't want to lose voters to the couch. We don't want people to not, we don't want people to not vote. And that's the problem here. And so when you shame, what I always tell my constituents and people on my staff is, don't shame apathy, inspire hope, inspire action. Don't shame people because they feel disillusioned. Because number one, a lot of them have a point. We live in a system that is messed up, and a lot of times we don't see the change we want as quickly as we want to see it. However, it doesn't mean don't be involved in this system, because when you walk away from a place of power, when you walk away from influencing power, guess what? People who don't have your best interests at heart are more than happy to step in that power on your behalf and make decisions on your behalf. And we don't want that. And that's part of the reason why voting is so important, whether it's voting for president to make sure that we reelect a president and reject this right wing fascist called Donald Trump, or elect people up and down the ballot, city council, school board, these races that are really important, that are going to impact your day to day life. And having a real conversation with people who are disillusioned, I think, is important. And I think casting them off and saying things like, get over yourself, or, there's only two choices. Are you an idiot? Stuff like that. It's not going to help us win. I think it pushes us to lose. And of course, I give a lot of, giving a lot of grace to Hillary Clinton. I mean, I tweeted about this, and I'm not trying to hit her specifically, but I wanted to make the statement because there's a lot of people who thinks that way. It's not just her. I mean, we see people post online about this all the time, and I just want people to think like an organizer. Is that really the message we want out for people? I don't think so. And so, like, what is the message that we do want? Our policies, what we believe in, protecting Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, working to end gun violence, defeating the climate crisis. I mean, these things are popular. So let's not get distracted. Let's focus on our agenda. We win when we focus on our agenda.
Yeah, and messaging is really important in such a high stakes time, which leads me to my next question, where there's this problem I've run into with our generation where people will hold overwhelmingly liberal beliefs at a fundamental level. So when I talk to some of my friends, they are pro-choice, they are pro-gay marriage, they believe in climate change, but they have this belief that Biden and Trump are effectively the same. So how do you combat that to a young voter?
I actually always like to bring it to a really personal level for people. There's a lot of talking points we can talk about. We know that President Biden's the most progressive president we've seen, and the most pro-labor president. But oftentimes, you say that and people still look at you like, all right, and so I like to talk about how the way I think about this. And a lot of people know gun violence has been the fight of my life, fighting to end gun violence. When I first got to Congress, my first bill was to introduce a federal office of gun violence prevention, something we've never had as a country. Can you believe it? We lose 100 lives a day due to gun violence. The leading cause of death for children and teens is a bullet. And our country, up until a few months ago, never had an office at the federal level solely focused on ending gun violence. And so I introduced the bill to create this White House Office of Gun Violence Prevention. And we worked with activists, organizers, the whole movement came together. And I get a call from the White House, and the president takes the bill and he implements it via executive order, and now we have an office. And it's not just, it's a building, it's an office in the White House. It's an office staffed by survivors, experts, and movement leaders who understand how we're going to fix this issue. And guess what? They worked hard, and we've seen millions and millions tens of millions go across the entire country to fund community violence intervention, which I protested during Black Lives Matter. Part of what I was fighting for was community investment in ending gun violence before it happens, so we can step away from our carceral system. And we know we can't arrest ourselves out of gun violence. We have to be in the community. And Joe Biden is the one that worked at getting that money into the Inflation Reduction Act and Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and it's going everywhere. My city got $1.5 million, and it's actually ending gun violence. And the community is doing that using federal money. And if Donald Trump is reelected, on day one, he will get rid of that office that the movement, survivors, activists have worked so hard to get. And not only will the office go away, but all that money that's literally saving lives in our community, Black and brown lives, will go away too. That alone, for me as a survivor of gun violence and someone who's fighting to end gun violence, is a huge reason why I want to see the president reelected. And I always tell people, we're not going to always agree with everything he does, but part of voting is getting to pick who you're working with. And if you take a step back, you look at President Biden, like we've been brought in, we have the American Climate Corps. That's an ask that's been from the Sunrise Movement and legislators like AOC and Ed Markey. And now it's a reality, gun violence prevention movement. Trump gets elected, it all goes away. And it's not just that our movement will be on hold for 4 years, it's we'll actively take many steps back. And we don't have time to do that, especially with the climate crisis being here already. We don't have time. And so these are the reasons I'm supporting the president. And this is something Jamie Raskin told people in my district, especially for young voters. This is Joe Biden's last election. For a lot of folks, it's your first, and this first one's going to determine your second, third, or fourth, and whether you have a real second, third, or fourth one too. And that's really important. And so thinking about it that way and taking so much pressure off of this one vote, I think actually puts people in a place where they're more apt to go out and vote, and we need people to vote down ballot too. So that's what I always bring up. I always just like talk about the Office of Gun Violence Prevention, and I talk about it at a very personal, practical level. And I'm not saying I have that conversation and everyone goes, "Oh, you're right. Let me go vote." You know what I mean? There's rarely one conversation that's going to change someone's life, but it's the culmination of many conversations, many experiences that push someone on that day of early voting or when they get that vote by mail to fill out that ballot and send it in. And like the question is, do you want to be a part of the positive parts of someone's thought process when they're deciding whether or not they're going to vote, or the negative ones? And I think we know where we want to be as Democrats.
Yeah, and Donald Trump wouldn't even have entertained that office if he were in office. And something I try to get across to our generation from a harm reduction perspective, you don't have to think Joe Biden is perfect, but you can go down the list on every single issue, and Joe Biden is far, far better than Donald Trump. I want to pivot to your home state of Florida really quickly. Just recently, we learned that abortion and marijuana will be on the ballot. How do you see this affecting turnout in your
Yeah,
home
yeah.
state?
I thought you were going to say Mar-a-Lago. I was like, Mar-a-Lago will kind of be on the ballot. But so this is going to have a huge impact on the state. We're really excited to have the opportunity to vote directly on codifying abortion rights in our state constitution, and then also legalizing adult use marijuana, which is something we've wanted here in the state for a while. Both issues are polling very high. So if the election were held today, we feel confident about winning both. There's going to be a lot of money that comes into the state against both. Um, and I know a lot of people are saying Florida's going to turn blue because of this. I always like put some pause, right? We don't want to assume that, but what we can assume is that we're going to get a whole new electorate of voters that will come out, and now and voters who we can assume will be aligned with democratic values. We still have a big job to do. We got to communicate with them and convince them and persuade them that when you vote yes on Amendment 3 and 4, voting for Democrats goes hand in hand with that as well. And we hope that when people think about abortion, when people think about legalizing marijuana, they'll also vote for candidates that want to do that same thing. And I think candidates in this state have a good opportunity to tie themselves to that. But they can't tie themselves to that. But we're going to need bipartisan support to pass the legislation. These two ballot initiatives in the first place. So you don't want to make it too partisan. So there's a balancing act there. But I do think it's going to help us with the state. And when we win both ballot initiatives, it'll show people again that Florida is a state that we shouldn't give up on. I mean, this state is a forward-thinking, progressive state in terms of policy, but not in terms of politics. And people might ask, what's the difference? Well, policy. If we polled this state on every issue, it would be aligned with democratic values for the most part, overwhelmingly. When you poll us on candidates, sometimes people might think about voting the other way. And that's what happens when you have candidates who they understand this, they get into the ambiguity of like woke politics and wokeness and culture wars and this and that. They don't talk about the issues because they know they'll lose on the issues. This is why Ron DeSantis, when he signed that 6-week abortion ban, which, by the way, in about a little less than a month will be the law of the land in Florida, a near total abortion ban, he signed it in the dead of the night, no pomp and circumstance, because he knew it's not popular with Floridians. And we'll get to show him that at the ballot box in November.
Yeah, and that was my next question is if it's possible for Dems to win Florida, and you already sort of answered that, it's depending on how much we can really hone in on these issues. But I also wanted to ask you, it seems like like you said, Florida does have a progressive populace. A lot of the times when you talk to people on a personal level, you'll find out that they do agree with the Democrats on issues. So when I go to Trump rallies and I hear Trumpers say we should put America first and stop funding Ukraine, what I say is funding Ukraine is exactly how we put America first. But it feels like in Florida, Republicans have been pushing these regressive laws, these lifestyle threats, things that would fundamentally change the way we live. And a lot of people say, I don't live in Florida, this won't affect me. But now Republicans are trying to nationalize these issues with things like Project 2025. So, my final question to you is what scares you the most about a second Trump term, and what is truly at stake on a national level?
I mean, everything scares me. I'd say the thing that impacts everything is our democracy will hang in the balance again. And I'm not someone. I don't like to be super hyperbolic about things. I like to be very kind of honest and direct with people. And honestly, when people started saying if Trump was reelected, I don't know if we'll have another election or how it'll be. The first thing I thought was, everyone, let's not scare everyone that much. And then these things kept leaking about him talking about being a dictator on day one, him wanting people to rise at attention like they do for Kim Jong Un, and we found out more about January 6th. So we found out more about how he really tried to overturn the election, not just in terms of like the vibes, right, and like talking about it, but he actually was trying to use his power of the presidency to change the results of the election. And you realize if he did that in term one, imagine how emboldened he'll feel in term two if he was reelected to do the same thing. And that's something we should all be scared of, whether you're a Democrat or Republican, because that impacts every issue, and impacts like the bedrock of our democracy, and it's scary stuff. And a lot of people would say, well, listen, we have checks and balances in place that would allow that to happen, and that might be true. We don't know, but do we want to roll the dice on that? Do we want to test the bounds and limits of our democracy? Do we really want to go down that road when we have so much else that we have to focus on? I don't want to test it. I don't want to test it at all. It was already tested on January 6th and was already tested that entire Trump term. So what scares me is our ability, just letting this kind of right wing neo fascism creep into our government is scary stuff. We should not go down that road. This isn't your father's Republican Party, in terms of the Republican Party of Donald Trump and MAGA. They're scary. They want to take away our rights, and we got to fight back against it with everything we got. So that's why I'm going to be super involved in this election. I'm going to be up and down this country, doing everything I can to speak with young people, but all people, to make sure people go out and vote up and down the ballot, so we can protect our ability to protest and protect our ability to vote, so we can fight for the things we care about.
Yeah, people always say the metaphorical guardrails held during Trump's first term, but then they make the argument that we should just give him the keys to the car to try to run the car off the
Yep.
road again. It makes zero sense. And something I always say to wrap this up is someday our generation is going to be handed the keys to these institutions. You already have been. And this election decides whether we have functioning institutions when Gen Z starts
Yep.
to take over. Again, we don't like to be hyperbolic, but Donald Trump genuinely, people working with Project 2025 have talked about repealing the
Yeah.
22nd Amendment. This is real now. It's
Yeah.
very real. Is there any last words for Gen Z before we let you
No,
go?
to say what you're saying, yeah, it's 100% real. My mind completely changed over the last few years as we've seen this evidence come out, and it's real. They don't want democracy. They want minority rule. Just look at what's going on in Florida. So my last words is, look, there's many ways for people to be involved in politics. Voting is not the only thing we need to do. Vote, and then what do you do after that? Whether it's being involved in electoral politics, whether it's marching, whether it's protests, whether it's mutual aid, whether it's arts, there's room in this movement for everybody. We won't always agree on every single issue, but part of being a Democrat, part of our party is we have a broad coalition, and it allows us to do some big things. And so let's keep fighting together. And I appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for your time, Representative Frost. I hope we get to work together this election cycle to mobilize our generation, and I hope you have a great day.
Thank you. You too.